Thank you. Please, we look forward to having you join us and lead us in prayer this morning. Thank you very much.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We stand before you, Holy Spirit, conscious of our sinfulness, but aware that we gather in your name. Come to us, remain with us, and enlighten our hearts. Give us light and strength to know your will, to make it our own, and to live it in our lives. Guide us by your wisdom, support us by your power, for you are God, sharing the glory of Father and Son. You desire justice for all, enable us to uphold the rights of others. Do not allow us to be misled by ignorance or corrupted by fear or favor. Unite us to yourself in the bond of love, and keep us faithful to all that is true. As we gather in your name, may we temper justice with love, so that all our decisions may be pleasing to you and earn the reward promised to good and faithful servants. You live and reign with the Father and the Son, one God, forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Father Christian, thank you very much. Councilwoman Carr, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Carumba. Here. Councilman DeWitt.
Here.
Councilwoman Carr.
Here.
Mayor Simmons.
Here.
Councilman O'Flynn.
Here.
Councilman Gibson.
Present.
Councilman Forbes.
Present.
Okay, we're going to start with public comment on agenda items. Members of the public that would like to speak, please come forward at this time. Good morning, Don.
Morning. I guess just leave everything here. Okay. I'm here to speak on the public hearing item on Bonita Beach Road corridor overlay, and I just have a couple concerns. I'm concerned that the zoning changes are based on the portion of the city's comp plan that was adopted May 3rd, 2017 in the ordinance 1706, and not also on the other.
Would everybody please silence their phones, please? Thanks, Fred.
Turned off.
And not also on the other portions of the plan that affect Bonita Beach Road corridor. All of the policies of the city's comprehensive plan were created to guide the future growth of the city, specifically Goal 5, Policy 511, 513, and 514. This goal and its policies were developed by the developers, chamber members, realtors, and residents of Bonita Springs and adopted by the council. Specifically, Policy 511 requires rezoning to allow higher densities shall not be permitted on barrier and coastal islands. This comes into play if the beach zone begins at Hickory Boulevard rather than beginning on the east side of the bridge to the island. Policy 513, land use designations of undeveloped areas within coastal high hazard areas shall be considered for reduced density categories in order to limit the future population exposed to coastal flooding. A majority of Bonita Beach Road is in the coastal high hazard area between Hickory Boulevard and Old 41. Policy 514, development in the coastal high hazard Category 1 hurricane evacuation area shall be infill only and shall not exceed the surrounding property's density, intensity, except as allowed by existing zoning at the time of the adoption of the comprehensive plan. The entire length of Bonita Beach Road falls within the evacuation zone. Therefore, staff would not be able to just take an application and review to see if it is consistent only with this new zoning chapter. They would have to see what the surrounding property's density and intensity is and confirm that the proposed use does not exceed those existing uses. This is required in the adopted comprehensive Goal 5 and its policies. Every application for property along Bonita Beach Road should always be reviewed for the requirements found in Goal 5 of the city's adopted comp plan. That's been in force since 2002. In addition, another concern is the beach zone. I am thinking that it should begin on the east side of the bridge because the bridge is not 100 feet wide. It is indicated as the portion of Bonita Beach Road from Hickory Boulevard to Vanderbilt Beach Road. There is no way that it would be practical to have extra travel and pedestrian lanes for a short distance from Hickory Boulevard east to the bridge, and then they would have to disappear going over the bridge and then reappear east of the bridge. Therefore, beginning the beach zone east of the bridge would be much more practical. Yes, Bonita Beach Road can use a facelift, but at the same time, please ensure that our entire comp plan that the citizens adopted is followed. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Don. Other members of the public that would like to speak, please come forward. I'm going to take a quick time out to wash my hands. I had a pen explode in my hands, but I'll be back.
Good morning. My name is Barbara Ogle, and I'm here to speak today to say that I'm going to compliment Councilman O'Flynn. Thank you for being on the council. Also, I would like the City Council to consider a special election to fill the vacancy that is going to be on the council. And then also for the invoice for the South Lee Economic Development Council, I'd like to know if there's a report available to citizens of Bonita Springs to find out what the Economic Development Council actually has done for the city. And I don't know if that's available through city staff or not, but I'd appreciate that information as well. Before maybe you pay an invoice for $25,000, I'd like to know what we got for that or what we will get for it. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor, council members, city staff. I'll remember to introduce myself. I'm Dwight Usman from the Paradise Road area. You'll get a copy of this, but I want to speak on two things. I got this pet peeve about a downtown city hall, and I emailed all of you. Some of you responded. The consensus I got was a city hall would be a nice idea. Maybe not downtown, but it's not urgent. I agree. But there are a couple of issues that you're going to talk about here real soon that sort of impact that. I would ask that you consider not putting up for sale 3 downtown properties. The one that's called the Community Hall lot, the Banyan Tree lot, and there's 2 vacant lots next door. There's also a consent agenda item where you're going to approve a contract for $67,500 today to, not sure what, but come up with a new HVAC lighting plan. At least that's the way I understand it. And then I think it's going to cost $750,000 to do this, estimated. If that's true, wouldn't it be wise to see if CBRE can give you an estimate on what this building would sell for as is? And postpone the improvements. I'd also suggest that you ask CBRE about what they know in cities that have built new city halls. And finally, and most important, I would hope that a special election can be held within 60 to 90 days to fill the seat being vacated by my councilman, Peter. I've certainly made it clear that I like, respect, and hate to see Peter leave. But it is important that we have someone to represent us, the voters and taxpayers of this district, as soon after Peter leaves as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other members of the public that would like to speak, please come forward. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm also speaking to Green Sheet 1910-321 about the special election, and I appreciate the mayor and councilman and city administration for the opportunity to speak. I'm Deb Nesselhoff. I do live in Council District Number 4. I need representation for my district. We appreciate the service of Peter O'Flynn. I'm just urging you to set a special election to fill that vacancy as soon as possible. Surrounding communities have used the 60 to 90 day time frame, so I would hope that you all would consider the same. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Other members of the public that would like to speak, please come forward. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Paula McMichael. I'm the Director of Planning with Hol Montez. I'm here to speak on item 10 on your agenda, the LDC amendments. My client is Lynx Zuckerman at Bonita Grand LLC. We've submitted for a mixed-use plan development rezoning application. It's for property at the northwest corner of Bonita Beach Road and Bonita Grand. It's
Mr.
currently-
Mayor, I'm sorry, Ms. McMichael,
Yep.
real quick. I know that Dawn started out by giving some comments on the land development code regulations. It really would be proper to hold all those comments until we actually hear that item, since it's advertised as a public hearing.
I'm happy to hold my comments.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Other members of the public that would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Council, what's your pleasure? And we have an addendum, and two addendums. One is to approve an agreement with Florida Department of Environmental Protection for excessive turbidity samples during the Spring Creek dredging project. That's Green Sheet 1910-329. And Addendum 2, authorize staff to advertise requests for proposals for Fiesta Bonita Springs. That's Green Sheet 1910-330. Motion to approve in a second. Is there further discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Carumba? Aye. Councilman DeWitt?
Aye.
Councilwoman Carr?
Aye.
Mayor Simmons?
Aye.
Councilman O'Flynn?
Aye.
Councilman Gibson?
Aye.
Councilman Forbes?
Aye.
Okay, yes, Amy.
I just want to comment on E, because Barbara Ogle pointed that out. I do think it would be good if we had more interplay with the EDC, so we understand what they're doing and how they're integrating with our vision and what we're trying, our objectives. I don't think we really have had too many reports there. I think it's a good idea that we participate in that, but I do think we need closer interaction there. So
Okay.
maybe we could ask staff to facilitate that.
Okay, great. Great, thanks, Amy. Okay, proclamations and presentations. Item A is a presentation from Streets Alive of Southwest Florida on quote-unquote "Bikes on Street Give 3 Feet," end quote, sticker program and direction to staff. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to Mayor, Council, City staff. My name is Diana Giraldo. I am the President, Co-founder, and CEO of local nonprofit Streets Alive of Southwest Florida. Our mission statement is to foster a livable community through activities, advocacy, education, and service. You might know of our work for the transportation conference that we have put together for our area since 2015. I know that many of you and staff members have attended. And today, I am presenting the city of Bonita Springs with the Bike on the Street Give 3 Feet stickers. You did in 2016 accepted the generic stickers that we brought around to all of the larger employers of Lee County. We distributed over 2,000 of them, the ones that said 3 feet is the law. And you see them on all the sheriff cars, the lead tram buses, some of your fleets. One of the things that we understood after we did this, and it was very successful, is that a lot of people didn't understand what 3 feet and what law, right? And it was really hard for people to understand that. We want to educate people, and we also want to convey this message of bike on the street, give 3 feet, thumbs up. We're going to have to get along with one another. So we want to change the mentality of is the law so people are more receptive to it. We want to inspire a message of kindness so we can get along with one another, vehicle drivers and then cyclists alike. We have the opportunity to bring a substantial economic development industry here with cycling, like the Outer Banks of North Carolina have a $60 million industry on the cycling only. You have been an outstanding community stepping up for the infrastructure that we need, inclusive of everyone, cyclists and pedestrians alike. We're presenting the stickers here today to put in our fleet vehicles, your fleet vehicles, for anyone attending this meeting and anyone part of the staff. And I also want to present you with a certificate of appreciation for the Bike on the Street Give 3 Feet stickers. and also for your efforts towards a livable community inclusive of all. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to present this formally and maybe take a picture.
And also, we have a couple members of the bike pedestrian.
Yeah, great.
If they'd like to come up as part of the presentation.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you.
You're not gonna you have to give a speech.
Do you give these to Pelican Landing?
I can.
That's where I live. If you don't want to leave me a bundle, I'll just take it with me. Okay, I'll just take them. Okay, thank you.
Politeness, there's no pleasing thing. Oh, thank you.
All right. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, Peter, and Amy, you should get in. Yeah, Amy, you're, yeah.
Photo bombing you?
The mayor should, yeah.
Right, ready? 1, 2, 3. And one more. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Granny biker. They can satisfy me, they can satisfy anyone.
Oh, but you had the loss in your community, remember?
Okay, we're going to move on to item B, which is a presentation by staff on the bioreactor.
Good.
Matt Feeney, hello.
Good morning, Matt Feeney, Assistant City Manager. I also have Greg Rawl, who will take over part of this presentation in a few minutes. I'm going to give a little overview of the bioreactor project and then talk in depth with Greg about the results of what we did with some initial testing and some potential next steps for consideration in the future by council. So just as a quick refresher, this is the basin that we have a nutrient regulation on for the Imperial River. It encompasses 44,000, almost 45,000 square acres or square miles, 70 square miles, 44,000 acres. It has a mix of land uses ranging from agricultural to natural wetland, and then obviously urban development here in the city. We are required, as well as our other partners, which are the state in the form of FDOT, Lee County, and then the agricultural farms, to try and remove up to 60,000 pounds of nitrogen over the next 15 years out of the river by implementing projects and best management practices. The city's quota is 9,903 pounds. We've already reached about a 3,000 pound load reduction, but we still have another approximate 6,000 pounds to remove over the next period of time. The idea behind that is to reduce nitrogen levels to pre-development conditions so that the river can be in its healthiest condition. Here in the city, projects that will go towards that quota of nitrogen reduction really can only be applied in this T-stain shape here as it lies within the city limits. So you see, although we have the regulation across the entire city, the area that we can do projects that will be accounted for are really fairly limited to that shape. The project we're going to talk about is right in this area here, actually. In our downtown area. So the bioreactor essentially leveraged a natural process that goes on in a certain layer of the soil. It's a layer where oxygen is not readily available for decomposition bacteria. It's either tied up in the form of groundwater or just not in high concentrations that the bacteria can use. This graphic just illustrates that. The term that's used for that condition that we're trying to create is anaerobic, means oxygen starved. When we designed the project, we really looked at treating rainwater in the form of runoff, and we did load calculations based on the land uses that rainwater landed on, and we assumed some efficiency removal ratings that were fairly high, ranging from 80% to down to 40%, depending on which technological application it went through. And we crunched those numbers, and we kind of figured that the project could give us about 130 pounds of nitrogen reduction. I do want to remind council the point of this project is really to demonstrate a removal efficiency rating that the regulatory authorities can support so that we can implement future projects that have that rating efficiency. We're looking for a cost-effective way to remove nitrogen. Currently, there aren't very many cost-effective ways to do it, and they're very land-intensive. So that was kind of the goal of the project. We did leverage grant funding. About half of the project was provided for through a legislative appropriation, coupled with a $100,000 grant we got from the Water Management District. And then the city invested about $450,000 of its own money into building the project. The design leverages the technology across many different applications. It ranges from a 48-inch pipe, 4 foot in diameter, 185 foot long, filled with wood, to big, large beds that are wrapped in filter fabric. And that's what the photograph shows here. There's 5 beds that are 37 foot wide, 185 foot long, and water is allowed to go through any one of these paths. For testing purposes, and what Greg's going to talk about, we really looked at the 48-inch pipe because that was the most contained and isolated system that we could kind of run as a scientific process. The components are pretty simple. It's just chipped up wood, clean of bark and vegetative debris. Here, approximately this 3/4 of an inch in diameter, about the size of a quarter, or a quarter gives you a reference scale. We do have some other applications in the form of a nutrient reduction vault, and then we did apply some pea gravel in some of those open beds to allow water to move a little faster. Those were the ones where we anticipated a little lesser of a reduction rate. We constructed it back in 2015-16. Here are the beds again. And this is the pipe. It's fairly simple if you really think about the idea of what we've done. It's not rocket science in terms of construction. When we completed, the real advantage here is this wasn't an open retention pond that really has limited use other than for bird watching. Instead, we were able to install a 101 stall parking lot over the top. So we get to leverage the use of that, and that's important because this is in our downtown, and it does get utilized. When we have 4th of July, art festivals, any of the festivals during season, that parking lot is parked beyond the 101 stalls. Folks park out in the street and in the vacant areas along it as well. Now I'm going to let Greg take over.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. As Matt indicated, the bioreactor that we tested is bioreactor number 1, and you can see it's much smaller than the other 4. It's a 48-inch pipe that's full of 100% wood chips. Interestingly, I discovered that the wood chips that are used in this are all from local sources, and approximately 50% of the wood chips that went into this are from Melaleuca trees. So what we did, as Matt indicated, was we brought in a 21,000-gallon Baker tank, and we had a tanker truck where we shuttled water to the Baker tank. We had to figure out where we could get the highest nitrate load because the bioreactor tends to work best on nitrate as part of the denitrification process. So during the process, we were collecting field parameters as well as water quality parameters, specifically as it pertained to nitrogen. And this is the result of the testing. Basically, this is the removal efficiency on the far right corner with the red circle around it, and it ranged from 77% to over 98%. I don't believe we've ever seen anywhere in the country where we achieved this high removal efficiency. And what we did was we started this on September 12th and then concluded the data collection on the 19th. And what we were trying to do was maintain a relatively consistent influent quality of nitrate. And as you can see, we essentially did that. That's in this column here of the influent. and this is what came out of the effluent. Pretty significant reduction. And what we did change during the testing period was the hydraulic loading of the wall, and it's hydraulic residence time, and it's measured in days. And what that tells us is when we started to crank up the flow rate, the hydraulic residence time is inverse to the flow rate. We started to get some breakthrough, but nothing of any great significance. By breakthrough, I mean there was a slight increase in the effluent NO3 concentration coming out. This is just a graph showing over time, here's our concentration of NO3 nitrate going in, here's the concentration of what was measured coming out. And also on this plot is the hydraulic residence time. And you can see we had a little bit of a spike at the very end. But overall, outstanding performance. So what we learned in the testing was that the bioreactor performed best if we could feed it a constant regulated flow rate of water containing nitrogen. And to really do that, we have to get water on a sustained basis to the Phelps Avenue bioreactor. And luckily, where this was sited, it's pretty much midway between the Imperial River and Oak Creek to the south. We suspect that we can probably get a little higher nitrate out of Oak Creek. We've done some initial testing on that. We need to do some more. But basically what we are proposing for a second phase of this to put it into full operation and optimize the system is to run a pipeline to feed the site. And what we did was, in order to determine approximately what the removal rate could be once the full system's put into place, so we had to evaluate the entire 5 chambers based upon the performance of the single chamber. And as you can see in this figure, the 4 other chambers are much bigger. The one that we tested only has a saturated thickness volume of 8,500 gallons. The chambers 2 through 4 have approximately 69,000 gallons, and chamber 5 has approximately 78,000 gallons. So we end up with a total treatment capacity of almost 300,000 gallons. So extrapolating from what we learned to the entire facility, we've essentially come up with a matrix based upon varying residence times and concentration removal. And basically this particular matrix runs from over 200 pounds a day. Remember, the initial design was for 130, all the way up to almost 1,800 pounds a day. I feel that probably a good number, and what I based the cost effectiveness on, was a number, the 895 number, 895 pounds a year of nitrogen removal. So what we're looking at as part of the phase 2 system is constructing a pipeline and a pump station to feed water to the bioreactor. It's about 1,800 feet to Oak Creek to the south in terms of piping distance, and it's about 1,800 feet to the north to the Imperial. And the pipeline would go in the road right-of-ways. Had some preliminary discussions with the DEP. They're excited about it, and think that this may change the way nutrient issues are addressed in the state of Florida. This is the route in the magenta to the north to the Imperial. This is Oak Creek down here in the south, and then you can see the bioreactor located in the center. So the cost expended to date for what I'm calling phase 1, in other words, what's in the ground today and what we tested, has been $800,000 and change. The additional cost to get a pipeline in and a filtration system, as well as a pump station, and this is a planning level cost. It's approximately $270,000 additional dollars. So what we did was we took these costs on a projected removal rate and then determine what the cost was per pound removal of the nitrogen, okay? So if we use the entire cost of slightly over $1 million, it comes out about $84 a pound. If we only look at the phase 2 costs, the additional costs that would be put into this moving forward, it's about $21 a pound. And that's extremely cost effective. I put this table together, I know you can't see it, but the takeaway from this is these were 40 projects that DEP funded. A lot of these were hypothetical removal rates and costs, and the bottom line number here was $638 a pound. And I think in reality, if I did this 4 or 5 years ago, if I went back today and re-evaluated all these projects, I think the cost would go up dramatically higher. And remember, our number is much lower, as opposed to the average estimated $638 per pound removal. For the phase 2 alone, it's $21 a pound. And as I stated, phase 1 and phase 2, the entire project price, including phase 2, is $84 a pound. And I think what we've created, or what we will be creating, and I think Bonita should be recognized for this, is probably what's going to be the new gold standard for nitrogen removal. It's targeting nitrate, but nitrate is the most readily available form for things like blue-green algae that you see in the slide. And there's S79 with lots of blue-green algae backed up upstream. May I answer any questions?
Council, any questions or comments? Amy?
Well, I see that you said it has a 20-year life, but do the chips need to be replaced, or?
We don't believe so, based upon, we're in new territory here. But as long as we can keep it hydrated and keep it in an anaerobic condition, the deterioration is very, very low. You remember when Lake Okeechobee was low about 10 years ago, and they were finding these wood canoes that were thousands of years old? The reason they survived that long is because they were in an anaerobic condition. So that is an estimated number. I suspect it could be much longer than 20 years. And the interest rate, I didn't say, that I used to amortize the total cost for this to come up with the per pound was 3.5%. And that's what was used for the evaluation of all the DEP projects, to be on the same level.
I just want to thank you and the staff for engaging in this. This is very exciting, and it's always good to have a reasonable solution to environmental problems. So hopefully we could extend this to other areas within our city and within the state. And
yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you for all your effort.
Council, Peter?
Yeah, to echo Amy's comments, I mean, we have such a small staff and we have this great stuff, great success. So Matt, thank you. It's a success you buried, so people don't see it, but nicely done. 2 questions more for Matt than for Greg. So I'm assuming that this next expenditure, there's a possibility of getting some grants for it. But secondly, that's a step to meet our 5-year requirement, the next 5-year requirement, which we're bound to do anyhow?
So what really kind of came out of the testing, and Greg probably didn't overstate it enough, but the result was very exciting. Right. It really was higher than we thought, or had really going into this. So it led us to, see what the possibility could be quicker than we probably would have otherwise. I think next steps certainly would be, looking for grant dollars. I think this is grant worthy. Greg's had some conversations. I think there is an interest in the regulatory community to work with us. And in terms of, you lost me. What was your?
I'm just talking about our 5-year nutrient reduction.
Oh, yeah. So with that, I always present this project. What we set out to do was get a removal efficiency rating, because all of the technologies that are kind of on a pick list have a rating. And this technology, when we looked at it, it had been applied in areas in the Midwest since maybe the early 2000s. And they have removal ratings up there that they understood. So what we really set out to do is try and get a removal rating through the regulatory folks. So I think in partnering with them, we would be looking to get to the quota, yes, absolutely, and also get them to give us a commitment on what they think, based on the science or additional testing, what they think those removal rates could be.
I think for people who don't follow this, we have an impaired Imperial River, and we're under a government mandate, a state government mandate, to remove nitrogen and other contaminants from that and our other water sources. That's a requirement. So when you see numbers like 260,000, this is not something that's like staff is just coming up with this and saying we want to spend this money. It's responsive to that state government mandate.
Yes, and if I may add, we did this testing here because this kind of a system, even though this denitrification's been around since God created the earth, okay? And it hasn't really been fully tested in Florida. There's a system in Alachua County. I was not able to get any good data on removal rates. We do have some literature values from the central part of the country. We're blowing away the removal efficiencies and rates with this system. And it may in part be, and I don't have any backup for this at this point, is where they were testing this before in the central part of the country, groundwater temperature is a lot colder. Here, the water is a lot warmer. So we may have a much more rapid anaerobic rate occurring. But basically what we're presenting here is kind of an optimized system to take this system that was designed to remove 130 pounds a year to 900 plus, hopefully, for an additional expenditure. And in order to get the regulatory agencies and everybody on board with this, we needed to show some results. And so that was the goal of this.
Great, thank you. Fred?
Yeah, first of all, that state mandate is what you call an unfunded state mandate. Yes. Which is a key word, unfunded. And so I congratulate both Greg and Matt on their hard work. And I think what we should be also doing is looking at other potential sites, some of which we may already own, because this thing doesn't screw up the landscape. You could put one down right by the Imperial River in that park immediately to the west of the canoe launch place. It'd be right, and you wouldn't have almost no distance to pipe. And I really believe that even though we have, what was 800 some grand in the initial thing, I think if you got into building these, they would not cost near that. It'd be a small fraction of it. So I'm very excited about it, and I think that we can really clean up the water in Bonita if this thing works out. Probably exceed our goals.
Yeah, and if you can do that, then you can start selling credits to other entities, government entities.
Yeah, and it's a little sidelight. I facetiously said to Arlene, you and Matt and Greg are going to have your bag packed because you're going to be going all over the state of Florida and perhaps the other states along the Gulf making talks on these things, because everybody's going to be interested in it.
And we need to recognize one other person from city staff, and that's Dave Licardi. Dave was key in pulling this together and making this work too.
Yeah, and I spoke to Dave yesterday, and he pointed out, I kind of guessed this, but it's what's important is there has to be water kept in the bioreactor. It doesn't have to go through it, just stay in it full. Otherwise, the wood chips do go south.
We were able to get these up and running in record time. That was one of the things we were concerned about to start with, because it had been sitting for a period of time. And so we flushed it through several times, but when we first started testing on the downstream end, amazing results. I was blown away by it.
Thank you.
Mike, did you have something?
Just very impressive numbers, and congratulations, good work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to echo many of the statements made here. Great work. And is there anything we would do different moving forward? It's going great, but there's always the question, what else
Well, what we're going to have to do moving forward is get the water to it, and I think the most cost-effective way to make the most use out of the city's investment to date is to pipe water in. Right now, it looks like probably from Oak Creek, and then there will be testing associated with that to show how it's performing in the other chambers. The other chambers are a little bit different. They're much wider and not quite as tall, and 3 of them have 25% pea gravel mixed in with it, so we may see a little bit lower removal efficiency. I'm not sure, I'm not convinced it's going to be that much more. The other one is 100%. So moving forward, we'll be collecting that data, and that'll be something that all the regulatory agencies are interested in.
All right, dumb question, but I'm curious. Most of those days had 99 and 98, but then it went to 77 on day 7.
Well,
Is that
that's because we boosted up the flow rate through, which we dropped the hydraulic residence time to half a day. And there was one other blip in there that I think was an anomaly, and that was one data point. So,
just curious? Okay, wonderful.
No, that's
great work.
Excellent observation,
Council,
sir.
anything else?
Yeah, great work.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. Okay, we're going to move on now to mayor and council member items. Item A is a discussion on amending the Land Development Code, Chapter 4, Division 11, relating to wireless communication facilities, and this is Councilwoman Carr. Laura.
First, I want to thank Community Development and John Delmer in particular for all the help they've provided me on this. And basically, when the original decision was made in the code to have it 75 feet or lower, that would provide great service for our constituents. But it ends up that new technology, taller towers but fewer towers, makes more sense. And so the zoning board was pretty adamant on it. One person actually voted in protest against it just so that council would do something about it. And she wasn't directing it at me, but she was very frustrated that continually people come in and ask for taller towers, but they can't get taller towers because of how our code's written. So we just need to tweak the code so that the code's in sync with our constituents to get reliable, consistent, good cell reception. So it sort of.
I mean, John can add in, but I'll add a little bit. Part of the requirement for consideration of any variance by the zoning board is there's a question that they must ask, which is the request such a request that it's going to be a constant issue and should be something that should be addressed through policy and legislative changes to the code rather than constantly being heard as a variance? And so it was Ms. Craig on the zoning board who said, this seems to me that the code provisions at 75 feet as of right are inadequate because based on the testimony in that particular hearing, didn't seem that anyone would ever build that. And so the request was that the council take a look at maybe raising the height, understanding that then that would not require a public hearing again.
That's correct. And the thing is, even since these regulations have been written, how towers are developed has changed. So I would have no doubt that if we make an amendment here, we might be back in a couple more years because tower development will have changed. We've gone from a situation where it was basically carriers building their own towers. Now it's companies that specialize in towers. They lease the space out to the carriers. They try to obviously get as many carriers on each of those towers as possible. So we've gone from a situation where you have maybe a single carrier looking to provide service through a series of towers within your community to a series of tower companies looking to provide everybody's service or all carriers on those towers throughout your community. So as a result of that, I think the zoning board picked up on that change in development pattern and has asked that we bring this to you. So this is really your determination. We thought we had given you good advice a couple of years ago when this code was changed, and I think we did. Unfortunately, everybody changed the world on us. So yes,
So
ma'am.
what's the rule now?
Right now, the council has determined that the policy is to permit more smaller towers. And
What's the height rule?
about 75 feet. The higher you go past 75 feet, the more approvals that you're going to need. Above 75 feet needs a special exception. Over 125 feet needs a variance. So a 150-foot tower essentially needs 2 specific approvals from you.
Could you have a 75-foot tower in a residential area?
Yes, but not residential. We're trying to keep them away from residential zoning. So you've got residential development, agricultural districts, and other zoned districts. So it could exist, but you're not really looking to see it, one, in planned developments, which most of our residential communities exist, or the new ones, and two, you would probably find those more in areas like San Carlos Estates, where you have larger lots in AG2 zoning.
Part of the reason is that there's requirements generally that if the tower's to fall, they have to have enough area. So it's not like there would be someone putting one in a residential lot. They would, if they're in residential areas, they're going to be in other conditional use areas like schools or churches or other big, large parcels that tend to be in residential areas are the only locations that this would be likely to occur.
The only suggestion I would have, we're going to look at this, is look at other codes. And, I've looked at a few, that scientific survey, and they do distinguish between residential and commercial areas and such. And, come back with something that, protects the environment around residential areas and perhaps allows for higher heights in, maybe along 75, stuff like that.
Well, you also have the advantage, upcoming meeting, of seeing the case that was heard before the zoning board, and so you'll get that perspective.
This brings up a point, should we be talking about this since we are going to be seeing this as,
That application's already pending. You're not going to be able to change the ordinances in time.
That's the point I'm making. We haven't completed that case, which we're going to see in a couple weeks or something like that. And also, I do want to make the point that when the original regulation was written, there was a notion of having these height restrictions so that they would not interfere with residential areas. And even if it's not in place in a residential area, most of these towers above 120 or 100 feet are visible, and that there are some concerns about the effect that you're going to have on these other areas. The second point I want to make is that there was a belief, and I think it still exists, that you can provide adequate and very good service using a lower height if just one provider is housed on each tower. So it's whether you have a high tower or a low tower, you're not foreclosing the service to a certain community. The third point I want to make is that what we've been talking about over the past, we had a new regulation on that about 5G. 5G is not going to even be on towers. It's going to be low to the ground, but thousands of them all over the communities, and we don't have an ability to control that. So as you started in your discussion, this is an evolving technology, and I don't think that it's really possible for us to have a regulation that handles all these things that are happening all at the same time. So I'm not against, what I have a little concern about not requiring either a special exemption or a variance is that you foreclose the input from the neighborhoods. So once it goes without, if it's just a matter of right, then we're not going to see this, and neither is the neighborhood. So if we are going to change this, I think we should try to incorporate some kind of a outreach to neighborhoods within some reasonable time period so that they are protected. And I think that's one of the reasons why we had this regulation before, because we thought that we should have a lot of input. So maybe we could satisfy it in a certain way, I think we need a lot of work on this, rather than just saying, don't make it a special exemption or eliminate the need for a variance. I don't think that's the right way to go, but it's up to you people to
And
guide
I
us
wouldn't
there.
even be so presumptuous as to start changing approval processes at this point. I think right now we're discussing the philosophy of how you would like towers to develop within the city. And after we kind of come up to that conclusion, then we can start talking about how do we permit those towers? Because I think you're right. It's a situation where nobody wants to see it, but they like the reception.
Correct. But I don't know we could even say how do we want it to be in the city, because we all start with the saying we want to have really good service, we want our phones and all these other things that we're doing. But what does that mean to the city? Because we also have an aesthetic quality. And I don't want a 125-foot tower next to my house, and it's not going to happen because I'm in a planned community. But it's somebody else that's not in that. And you're saying just what, what the issue is. It's going to happen in these agricultural communities or other zone communities where we have residential areas. And we've had other issues when people have tried to do things which are outside the normal idea of what you should have in a residential area. So I would be very careful going forward with this.
And unless you change the regulation that the tower has to fall completely within the property, you're always going to have larger lots, because a 150-foot tower is going to require a minimum of a 300-foot lot, both in terms of length and depth, or width and depth.
Fred?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up that another factor that needs to be put into this, and that is the county, mid-September roughly, awarded a big contract to Motorola to completely redo all the radio communication in Lee County. And they'll be building new 300-foot towers. And then on the 300-foot towers, they'll be leasing out space, somebody will, for cell phone receiver and transmitters. So that by itself will improve cell phone reception in our area, especially east of I-75, which is the farther east you go, the more it becomes almost unacceptable.
Well, I hate to say, all the work you put into it, but it does sound like we should just wait and the zoning board just hear the cases that come in front of them. Because there are, and then my other concern is also, what if they go bankrupt and they just leave us with the tower?
Right.
And then we're stuck taking, and while I love the statue and the sculpture in the front, it was a little tricky getting that in place. So that would just, so maybe we just table this and.
Well, if I can suggest, maybe since you have a case coming before you, maybe we hear this case, and at that conclusion, we determine if you want to change the regulations or if you like how the process works.
John,
Ma'am.
Laura brought up an important thing. Is there any ability for us to require that they take them down? Because I think they must have some kind of a life. We don't have that in our code now, do we? And
Probably not to any
it'd be hard
degree
to
that-
enforce also.
You really have to be creative in how that's going to be set up, and generally,
bond.
funds have got to be set up
Well,
up front.
I'd like to pursue that because I think that that's, a long-term problem.
And that is something that Councilman Carr and I discussed, is if there was going to be a change, that would need to be part of it, a very big part of it, actually. Because this is an evolving technology. If something changes and a company goes bankrupt because their model no longer works, now they've got these towers that are up in your community and you're left holding the bag. So what do you do with those towers that are already there, especially with a company that is insolvent? So.
Right.
Well,
Mike?
I think we should be looking at it now, but if the consensus is to wait until after our zoning meeting on it, the Technology Advisory Board did have a presentation on this, and pretty much the reason is, what the city has at the 75-foot does not work for the carriers. Like you said, the model changed. Companies are out there building and everybody's co-locating. But it's one of the things that's just like too many hoops to go through. It makes it too hard to do, and then it makes it not as feasible money-wise for these companies to do. And that's why we're kind of lacking in service right now. To the 5G point, I had asked about that because, we know that we're going to be getting a lot of these smaller things in the right-of-ways. They work in conjunction with the other towers, so we can't just not have the big towers and only have them. They still need the taller towers. Because it's like a bandwidth thing, so you need those to fill in. But that's the other problem, is that a lot of people may feel like they have good service now. You look at your phone at home, you have full bars. But the problem is the number of users. So as we're getting more people even just driving through your area, so like on 41 early in the morning when nobody's on the road, you may have full bars. But at rush hour traffic, so many people are going through with their phones, you're going to see your bars drop. And that's another reason why they need more towers in order to fill that in. So
If we get rid of that, towers going to get rid of the cars.
Yeah.
Rid of the cars? Is that what you said?
Well, I don't know. Do we want to consider a vote and add that there's a bond set up?
I think we're not there yet, I think we need, I really would want the staff to work on some of the things I think you have a good point, and I think I'm concerned about the technology changes that are happening so quickly, And I'm not against putting a 125-foot tower. I just want to make sure that the people, the community has a chance to really be aware and to react to whatever comes. That's my objection. And if you could write something in where there's protections there, it's fine with me. And I don't know, and I think, again, I haven't talked to the technology people, but I do think if one carrier decided to go on a 75-foot tower, they could get service. It may be too expensive for them to do it, but it's not that they can't deliver the service.
But it's also range too, so when you're at a higher level, that one carrier can reach a bigger square mile area. But if they're at 75 foot, that one carrier may need 3 towers. But you have 3 or 4 major carriers, so now you're talking 12 towers where one could suffice. So do we want 12 75-foot towers or 125, 150-foot towers?
Depends on where they are.
I was gonna say, if it's in your backyard, you don't.
But it
Yeah,
has to
it's always NIMBY.
But you have to have so much space around.
But
That's-
well, look at the one that's coming up. It's in a church, and it's where the church is surrounded by
We talk about that?
residential. I'm just,
Yeah, I mean, you'll be dealing with the fact
I'm
of.
just saying, in general, let's
Okay,
say these
general.
open, in general, if you're talking churches or whatever, they're still surrounded. Every church here, let's use St. Leo's.
Right.
Surrounded by, Vanderbilt Lakes and all that. Even in your neighborhood, let's say they put one over in El Dorado Acres, 120 foot, you're still gonna see it from your house.
No, not.
And there is a tower by St. Leo's, so.
So, let me,
I'm just
maybe.
saying, by every one of those larger areas where you're gonna put it, it's surrounded by, there's no,
Yeah, that's the
unless
point
you
I'm
go,
making.
even in San Carlos Estates.
Correct.
That's a residential community, pseudo AG2.
I may be reading a little bit into Ms. Craig's opinion or her comments, but I think the particular issue in that case was there was a special exception and a variance. The variance requires different standards than the special exception, and those variance standards say that effectively there's got to be something absolutely unique about the issue. And what I think Ms. Carr is bringing out is that it's not unique if this is now the model and it's constantly coming up. So I think some of the heartburn was granting the variance when this is effectively standard practice. So that wouldn't necessarily, to change the height limitations, wouldn't necessarily mean you wouldn't have a public hearing. You just might put some of those criteria that you want to address through the variance process for the extra height into the special exception process so that you're looking at it all coherently, but you're not having to make findings about the difference between 75 feet and 130 feet based on some hardship that may or may not be available. So I think that's the.
I watched the video, and I think you're right there. That was her point, that she was focusing on the variance part. She says, do we have to have a variance every time somebody comes here? Which, doesn't make sense, but that's an impracticality that we have in the code.
I think this, if Laura hasn't said this, I think staff should go ahead and do the research on this. I don't think we have to wait for some zoning case to happen, for staff to go ahead and do the research. One thing I'd be interested in is, what does Collier County do? I mean, they're literally an inch away from Bonita Springs. They must have the same issues. And what do they do for all of North Naples, et cetera? Be interesting to know.
Fred, I apologize. You've been
All I
waiting
want
patiently.
is that when, next time we discuss this, I want community development to have the best information they can get on where all these big 300-foot towers are gonna go in our neck of the woods. Because that will change the dynamics of this.
Oh, okay. We have, I believe this case is scheduled for the second meeting in November. So we'll look to kind of work with that timeline and have at least an outline and some information for you to start some discussion.
After that case.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
That's what I meant by timing and
Right,
coordinating.
okay.
Great, council, anything else on this?
Oh, good.
Okay. Item B is a discussion on potential amendments to section 4-182, measurement permitted encroachments, and this is Councilwoman Carr.
Many of us are familiar with the Bonita Lakes case, and it's similar issues that other communities are running into. And that is, we had a code that gave a certain amount of setback required. People built according to code. Then we changed the code and did away with the old code completely. And then, so now people have to have different setbacks, which makes it impossible for them to install certain things, such as pool equipment. It's very specific what they can, what we're going after here. And so they can put in a generator, pool equipment properly, and so forth. But they don't have to keep going back and reinventing the wheel, so that we follow this guidelines that were outlined and work through. I mean, community development did a phenomenal job with Bonita Lakes, and we can then just carry that over to other communities that are running into the same problems.
I don't understand. I'm sorry.
I said what it is, I mean,
Because the setback was
No,
10.
I don't understand what you're suggesting.
don't make it as a variance every time where they
This
gotta
is for
come.
0 setbacks?
What I think happened was, this is another very recent regulation that we put in place, and you've had there was the second community that's come forward to modify that regulation for their specific plan development, and that was to allow for mechanical pads to go into that setback area when you have 5-foot setbacks for a single-family house. And there was a series of conditions that allowed them to still have a functioning site, but allowed them to bring those pads where they're currently prohibited. Now, the discussion started off for this item many years ago, well, I guess not that many years ago, as a situation out on Hickory Island where you had cantilevered pads for mechanical equipment that was right next to older homes. They were right outside the window, and council decided that was not something that you wanted to permit. That was then extended citywide. And now you're starting to see some of the existing plan developments come back in and modify that standard just for their community. The statement from the zoning board was, well, if we can do something for these specific communities, should we also look at doing this citywide for these same situations?
The question I have is actually it's for Derek, because what you're talking about was put in 2011. It wasn't 500 years ago. And it was a lot of talk about it. We all know something happened on Little Hickory Island, and there had to be, the whole thing had to be redone, because unfortunately the people had to bring a lawsuit or close to it to just have the thing enforced. So there's good reason why you don't want a lot of noise next to your bedroom window, and that's why the council did this in 2011. Now, meanwhile, we have had Bonita Lakes, and they are mutually consenting adults. They came together and they said, we don't mind the noise next to the bedroom windows. We're going to go in and ask for, which is what they did from us, an exemption for that. So where my head is at is, and I'm going to get to the question for Derek, is, all right, well, if we said planned developments can do that under their rules, make it easier for them, because there are a lot of restrictions put in here. It wasn't like just throw the thing in. What happens to the rest of the city? I mean, I don't want it to be like, well, on Little Hickory Island, all of a sudden they have to worry again about having the air conditioner next door to the window. And then they say, well, the gated communities can do it, why can't I do it?
I dealt with this issue years ago in Fort Myers Beach, and the problem is exacerbated by the communities where you have flood elevation changes. That's probably where that's why it shows up there first, because you're talking, the mechanical pads now have to be elevated out of the floodplain, and so now you have houses that are 14 feet above and an at grade house below, and that's where these conflicts. So the issue is, I think you pointed out correctly, it's the mutually consenting adult example is homes that are all consistent. So it's a development that's built together. And while it may show up on the islands first, it's going to show up anywhere where you're going to have older homes next to newer homes. That's where, so you're downtown, anywhere where you're going to have tightly packed towns. So maybe the solutions you could look into is an administrative process for PDs. So where developments are like to like, you could have an administrative process to make it so they don't have to come in and get a whole rezoning. And then for these older communities where you're going to be dealing with this issue one way or the other, you might want to look at, because even if you have two homes, if one is being modified to come up to code, it may require that they elevate their existing pads as well. Maybe you need to have some kind of codes that deal with nonconformities, so that if a pad goes in the setback, it's not next to a bedroom.
Let me be more specific. Can we do this just for lack of a better word, gated communities that have their own governance? And then what about people who are not? You know,
The way I would treat it is I would treat it as a voluntary, the gated communities can come in for an administrative approval if they want that change to their zoning. And then everybody else who's got straight zoning, you'd want to look at it differently because the rules would be different.
that's okay.
Yes, you could do that.
You may just want to consider an exception to that where if there's a requirement for elevated pads or cantilevered pads because of changes in flood regulations, that those do go through a hearing. If there is not a requirement, then I think that would be fine to go through administratively if they go through the similar conditions.
What are you saying, John?
I don't think it's just for elevated, though. I mean, I agree with Derek that it should not be citywide.
Oh, no, that's not my suggestion. My suggestion is within his, if you have an existing plan development and you wish to come in through this administratively, as the city attorney outlined, that would be fine. However, some of our plan developments are an older, or been around long enough where flood elevations have changed. If you now require a higher elevation where you would have to elevate or cantilever those pads, that comes back to the same situation we dealt with on Little Hickory Island, which is I think what this council wants to avoid. So if everything's at grade, there's no problem with the process. If you start looking at a requirement where FEMA has changed the elevation, where those have got to be now higher than they were before, I think that you may want to at least see those applications as part of a specific public hearing request.
Good.
Absolutely.
Fred, do you have something?
I don't think I've answered all the questions because I'm still seeing a couple of confused looks. So
I would be very cautious about assuming that all HOAs have the same degree of how they interpret things and how they regulate.
Okay.
They don't.
So what?
Bonita Bay is a model, Pelican Landing is a model. There's some that are not.
All right.
Same way in stormwater management.
So what do you?
Well, I think we need to just be a little cautious, and I think we need to make some of these accommodations, but see if we can take a little time to think on it.
Okay.
Excuse me, like, if a planned gated community came to the city and said administratively, we want to change this, could we at that time sort of give them a warrant to do that, so that when they came for the first time, in the sense that they would have to apply to the city and say we want to allow it to be 0 or whatever they're trying to do, but when they get the initial permission, that's when they have to have sort of more like a public hearing, so people within their community can come and say, I like it or I don't like it or anything like that. Even though it'd sort of be a one-time permission, you know what I mean?
So we have a little bit of a similar model to this. If you recall, a few years ago, Highland Woods contacted the city because they had an overabundance of trees. They had trees that were in the right-of-way that actually were not required. It was causing damage to the existing sidewalks, and it was root damage. We created by resolution a process for gated communities through the master association. So if there's conflict between sub-associations and the master, the sub could discuss it. It had to come through the master. And we had an application form filled out for a mitigation program for the trees when we had already done a determination that the amount of trees were required, survey work was already done. And there was an administrative process for the removal of some of those trees. So when you created that program by resolution with a form and an application, and it set requirements that it has to be administered by the master association with the final approval. So it's up to the resident of that neighborhood to go to their subcommittee, get that signed off if they have an architectural review board, so that way we were ensured as staff that there was a consistent view of everyone in the community when it came forward. So we can maybe look at that, how we created that program, the resolution. If you're wanting to look at this for gated communities, you'd have to have sign-off forms, by the master association that they're asking for it, and that way we can conclude that they have vetted it through their neighborhood association.
But the Bonita Lakes model has a lot of that stuff in it, including, if I remember, John, the next door neighbors have to be okay. You know?
The homeowner association
Yeah.
and the neighbors.
Right, so it's actually, that's the beauty of what they did.
And I think that's great. They've got their act together. I'm telling you, there are other communities that don't.
But the structure would almost force those communities to come in compliance.
I
Or
think.
they don't
If
get,
they can't get their act together on stormwater, they're not gonna get it together on this.
Well, I think that
well, then,
under those
remove it
situations,
if
you've
you
got
want it.
bigger fish to fry, so I would agree. But
yeah.
if the council's okay, I think that you've given some pretty good input. I think the conditions from Bonita Lakes are something that you generally agreed to, that we would put as the basis of this. Now it comes to wrapping the process around that, which a little bit of the tree removal, hearing process. I think Bonita Lakes also did some pretty good outreach as well, so we can try to morph those two into something that we can bring forward to you.
Great. Thank you, John.
Wonderful, thank you.
Hey, Laura, thank you.
That was a good discussion.
Yes, dynamite, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the second reading of the
Okay.
following ordinance.
An ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs calling for and ordering a binding referendum to be held in the City of Bonita Springs on March 17th, 2020, to determine whether a majority of the electors voting in such referendum are in favor of certain proposed charter amendments, establishing the date of this referendum for the charter amendment to be held on March 17th, 2020, requesting that the Lee County Supervisor elections conduct the election in accordance with applicable laws and regulations, providing ballot language, directing that the notice of election be prepared and published, providing for inclusion in the charter, providing for severability, scrivener's errors, and an effective date. So this is the second reading on the proposed charter amendments, including the ballot language. As you recall from the last meeting, we were making a change to the actual changes to be revised in section 47, which is on page 11. The ballot language doesn't change at all because we're really taking out the abandonment clause of appropriations that have not been expended in 3 years. All the remaining language stays the same. This is your opportunity to comment, see if you want any additional changes. I will ask that I probably will put in the, I will request that whoever makes the motion to move this forward, I will make a request that we add a provision in saying that if the supervisor elections for some reason wants requests to change to clarify something on the ballot question issue, then we can do that administratively, not have to restart the public hearing process. This is going to them now. This month we have to get it out to them because they also, under Florida law, they have to translate it. They have to use the same translator for all the March elections, so they'll be making all the ballot questions in English and in Spanish. So that's why I can see the possibility of some need to tweak questions for clarification issues. Other than that, I don't have anything.
Are we supposed to go down, are we supposed to go on each one of these and say,
If you have comments on each one of them, or remember, these are the recommendations of the Charter Review Committee. You can accept them, you can modify them, you can reject them. So this is your last opportunity before they go onto the ballot to be considered for charter amendments. If you either want to change something, propose something new, or to remove something from that ballot initiative, this is the time to
We do this like the consent agenda, so it's a lot of kind of run-of-the-mill stuff in here, unless people want to talk about individual items. Does that make sense, Peter?
Sure.
So I move to approve, subject to that.
well, I'd like to sort of talk about individual things. I mean, I
Well,
think a lot of them.
I'll second.
Yeah.
All right.
And then discussion.
And then pull which items. I think what he's suggesting is
Right.
pulling which items you want to talk about.
Okay, so, I mean, I think we should, we agree that number one is routine, number two is routine, and three is routine, unless someone objects to it. I mean, that's what I would like to do. Council
Yeah,
meetings.
probably go one at a time through them. If we all agree, then.
All right, I
You
withdraw
know,
my,
I think that would,
withdraw my motion.
no, I think we should,
That's fine.
okay, all right, so, somebody, who wants to,
Go ahead.
okay, number one.
Remind you, you
do
also
it.
have a 10:50.
Okay.
No, we'll do,
Motion to approve.
okay,
One.
do you want to do it? I think number one is routine. Anybody
Motion to
object?
approve. Second.
Okay, there's been a motion to approve item 1 in a second. Is there further discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilman DeWitt.
Aye.
Councilwoman Carr.
Aye.
Mayor Simmons.
Aye.
Councilman O'Flynn.
Aye.
Councilman Gibson.
Aye.
Councilman Forbes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Carumba.
Aye. Okay, number two.
Motion to approve. Second.
There's been a motion to approve item number 2 in a second. Is there further discussion?
Wait, could we just, I'm sorry.
Yeah, not a problem.
I think we should just pull out the one you have issues with and say, because we do have a time frame issue, that if we get mucked down and just going through even ones we all agree on to do this process, So can't we just pull the ones that you don't
Well,
have issue, or you want to discuss?
Or can we just discuss the ones that we want to discuss and then
Yeah.
change those couple things and then do one vote at the end
why
for?
don't we just go, if somebody says, take it off the consent agreement, and we don't have to vote every
Fine.
time,
Right.
and then we'll vote all the ones we all agree on, and then we'll go back. So, number 3, I think, should be sort of like a consent, okay? Council meetings a consent, unless somebody objects to it. Adoption of ordinance, number 5, good.
Well, hold on, they're not numbered, so I mean,
I think
okay, so
they are.
number 4,
she's going from the ballot questions.
okay,
Some of them
yeah,
will
yeah,
affect
I
more
see-
than
I
one.
see the numbers up there now. So on number 4, it says meetings where no action is taken would require 24 hours. But the text that's below it, that's not what the text says. The text below,
Section 24.
So
it says nothing herein shall prohibit council from holding workshops or other meetings where no action is taken upon less than 24 hours notice. So it's saying nothing will prohibit us from doing it in less than 24 hours. Where the actual question that would be on the ballot says you can't do it in less than 24 hours.
Okay.
So should we have 24 hours or not have 24 hours?
I think we should, but I mean, the text that's down in section 24, that's not what that says, so.
Okay, I'll clarify to match up. The
Okay.
text, if you're okay with section
The
24, that's
the
fine.
question is fine, it's the text that's down in section 24 doesn't match.
Which one you want the match on, Mike?
I'm fine with the 24 hours.
Okay,
Okay.
all right,
I'm fine with the question.
okay. I'm going from the questions, is that okay?
Yep.
5, adoption of ordinances, okay.
But there's an alternative there. I think they're both a little,
The alternative
Not
language.
straightforward.
Let me give you the reason why. The alternative language was the language that was proposed in 2010 and voted down by a very slim margin. So rather than just using the same ballot language in case there was concern that the ballot language itself was the issue that brought concern, we proposed new language for the question. So the alternative language is from 2010. The language above, that's the new request.
What's your
Okay.
concern with the?
so I'd go with the new one, not the alternative then.
Me too.
I think that's a little more.
Agreed.
Good. Record keeping, okay.
6, yeah, okay.
Keep going, Amy.
Budget notice, okay. Okay, lapse of appropriations, I just would like I don't quite understand this.
Derek, explanation there?
Sure, let me
What was the thinking there?
The thinking there is, if you go to page 11, which is the lapse appropriation language, and I'll read it out as, this is existing language in your charter, every appropriation except an appropriation for capital expenditure shall lapse at the close of the fiscal year to the extent it has not been expended or encumbered. Okay, we're fine with that, because we issue a new budget every year. An appropriation for capital expenditure shall continue in force until expended, revised, or repealed. Okay, because that's, again, your CIP is multi-year, beyond 3 years. The language that is currently in your charter, after that capital expenditure will continue in force until expended, revised, or repealed, it's a semicolon, the purpose of any such appropriation shall be deemed abandoned if 3 years pass without disbursement from an encumbrance or appropriation. So what it appears to say is if you have to take things off your CIP if you haven't done something in 3 years. Well, we generally look at a 5-year CIP, and although we could still just reappropriate something back on, as we do every year with the budget, this language concerned us from the perspective of, well, it could be, for instance, borrowing. If you're borrowing for a long period of time, maybe your lender will look at, well, what does this charter provision mean? And we don't really have an answer for it. So,
I didn't realize that it applied to CIP.
okay, yes, it
Okay,
applies
no,
to you.
no, that's great with me, okay.
There's also other long-term permitting implications of those. Some of them are a priority of council, but it takes several years through the state permitting processes.
Okay.
Well, hang on a second. The question says, you got a point there, Amy. I think.
Well,
Remove a provision that requires unexpended non-capital appropriations.
Yeah, this is wrong.
Okay, so it just needs to be capital.
Yeah,
No wonder I was confused.
right.
Well, originally it was, we were taking out the whole section altogether.
Okay, all right.
Finance request, we keep part of it in.
Okay, so then the capital program, it's fine, unless, Code of Ethics. Could we just think about what exactly we're saying here and how it's going to affect our lives here?
Well, let me give, this was an issue that went back and forth multiple times at the Charter Review Committee. And it's difficult for me to probably give all the perspectives on it because there were a variety, and ultimately this was, I'll call a compromise vote. But ex parte communications, that's a due process issue. So Florida courts have ruled that if you have an item that's quasi-judicial, just as a court and a judge under the rules of judicial administration will be prohibited from having conversations outside of the courtroom that may impact what they're going to vote on, in a quasi-judicial proceeding, the council should not be engaging in communications with outside parties. And the Attorney General has determined that staff is an outside party, the actual applicant, any objectors, the citizens. The idea is that all the evidence that's presented for the quasi-judicial hearing is heard at the hearing. So what ended up happening was Florida courts many years ago ruled that there is a presumption that if there's been an ex parte discussion outside of the hearing, that is presumed to be prejudicial against the other party. So if the applicant had discussions with counsel before the meeting, then that be presumed that the neighbors were prejudiced in that, and so they would have a right of appeal. The legislature changed that and said that we're going to remove the presumption if by local ordinances, the local governments adopt a process for disclosing those communications. So basically, keeping records of written communications, keeping records of communications with staff, applicants, others. I think the concern of the charter review was twofold. There were some members who were concerned that without allowing for ex parte discussions, the council will not have the benefit, particularly on complicated land use items, of being able to have that dialogue with either staff or the applicant, or presumably the objectors as well, to explain their case more than maybe in the 3 minutes they're allotted at that hearing. At the same time, I think there was a group of members of the committee who were concerned that any communications, maybe it's not just prejudicial, but could have undue influence. So, because that's why it was targeted in the vein of ethics. It wasn't so much about prejudicing one party or not during the quasi-judicial process, as it was also a concern that by allowing developers or neighbors who you may live, maybe within your district, to have an undue influence on the process. And so sort of the compromise that was come to at the, I'll say it was 11th hour compromise, was as a practical matter, and you had this discussion previously with the committee, how are you going to disclose or if you're going to have a prohibition, how are you supposed to, if you see someone in Publix, you say, I can't talk to you about that, or what happens if you do, what are the consequences of it? So the concern, one of the concerns that we have obviously from the city staff perspective is that what happens when there are communications that are ex parte, and even if they're disclosed by the member, if the communications, maybe by an applicant or another party who's likely the parties who may challenge the litigation, through litigation, quasi-judicial approval, have the opportunity to present evidence that maybe staff feels is false or misinterpretations of code. So there was a proposal say, well, if you're going to have with the main parties to a quasi-judicial proceeding, if you're going to have communications, staff would like to be present in those communications to, one, keep a record, make sure that there is nothing being said that then later on is alleged to have occurred that did not occur, or also to be able to counter and to be able to address the council's comments about the process. So there would be the only place I can really think about this would be
Wait, so Derek,
sorry.
Staff, when I would have a question for John Dahmer, for example, I'd have to fill out a form, he'd fill out a form. and then it would go into a file, and only if there was a problem would that come back out?
No, so right now, if staff is an applicant, so it's a city-initiated proposal, like a staff rezoning or something like that, you should keep a record of those communications, or staff should keep a record of those communications, so that they can be part of the record for adoption, because they're technically the advocate, they're the applicant in that situation. So the Attorney General has at least opined that even though it's not generally considered that staff is ex parte, when they are proposing something, and for fairness purposes, you should have those records kept.
That's right.
That's right now. And that would not change with this. The only thing this is changing is adding an additional step, which is if, Ms. Carr, you want to have a conversation with a cell phone tower applicant, someone who has heard your comments about trying to find out a way to make sure that this process, and they want to have a meeting with you to talk about the technology and what may happen on their application. This charter amendment, if it passes, would require that staff be in the room. Now, it wouldn't apply to the
Wait, so
person
then I
at
could say,
Publix.
I don't, but then I could, well, I do
Why
say,
wouldn't it?
Because we've listed it down as just the parties.
Well, if you see that party in Publix,
If you see that party in Publix, you can't have a conversation with them. But general public comments,
but, wait, you, about the specific issue, but you can.
about this, no, you can say
Say
hello.
hello and
You can-
how's the kid?
Right, absolutely.
But would a party, this is what, at least I read into this, would the party be your neighbor? Or someone
If-
you meet on my walks, which is where I met everybody and had to write up a paper, a report on every one of them? Should you say, I can't talk about it? I mean, what does this do? Because it's not practical for me to call the staff and say, my neighbor met me on my walk and she wanted to talk.
No, this, if
What am I
this
supposed to
is,
do?
this will be if your neighbor is applying for a variance that's gonna come to you, then yes, you would, I can't talk to you unless we have staff present.
No, but what about the community? I understand that, because that's a part, that's what I see as a
You
part.
would still need to make an ex parte disclosure currently, but you could have those conversations with them.
Okay, and I
This
wouldn't
is
have to
just
call a
parties.
staff person and say, come over and walk 100 miles with me. No, okay, that was my.
today.
Not today.
But
But
this
if this is
passes, you
passed.
will.
If this goes through and that person, whoever you talk to, becomes a party,
Yeah.
either an intervener or an objector, or then you would have to have staff present.
Derek, two questions I want to clarify. If you're out for a walk, if you're in the grocery market, and somebody comes up and they say, I'm against this case, X, Y, and Z, or I'm for it, and you say, I can't talk to you about it, they still talk to you about it. That's ex parte, and it's got to be reported, correct?
if they're a party.
What's a party?
No, no.
No.
That's the current law.
If they have
You're
nothing
out
to
for a
do-
walk in your neighborhood and somebody
Talking
talks
to
to
you about
you.
it, they have something to do with it.
That's right.
Colonel Lurie's right.
They're influencing the judge. Secondly, if any one of us talks to staff about a project, that's ex parte, including special counsel.
Correct.
So currently, when I talk to someone, I say, if you want to talk to me, okay, but I got to fill out a report with your name on it. That was my usual routine, all right? And that's what I do. So is that okay to continue doing that?
That would continue even if this passes. What would change would be if, let's say we had a project, and I'll say it, the neighborhood is neighborhood Blackacre. And next door is a Baptist church. And the Baptist church is opposed to what's going on the Blackacre parcel. If anyone from Blackacre or the Baptist church who are going to be, or parties, are asking for recognition, party status to oppose the application, going through the process, either one of them contact you, you would be required, you would tell them, I cannot speak with you unless we set up a meeting with staff.
Party status.
Yes. And the reason why party status is,
Explain that.
well, the reason is party status is important for us, because the request here is to help protect the city from allegations that the communications, at least from my perspective, is to protect the city from allegations that there were ex parte communications with one of the main parties to a land use petition, and that either something prejudicial occurred during that, misrepresented, or something that's going to come back to bind the city, and that one of the other parties is going to allege some kind of impropriety and use that as a basis for challenge. At least having staff there will help clarify any issues and will give, a witness to the communications. I don't want to impose that I'm in favor of anything that adds more layers. I think that there is a little bit of a misunderstanding, even at the charter review level, of what ex parte really means. And as I said, there were two schools of thought on this. There were the disclosure part and the due process considerations, and then there was groups who were thinking about undue influence and trying to limit the number of meetings. For instance, Ms. Craig, who was on the Charter Review Committee and on the Zoning Board. The Zoning Board, even though they're not required to, they have voluntarily agreed not to have any ex parte communications on any applications. They just want to hear it all at that meeting. Now, they're not obviously as visible in the public as the council is, so I doubt that there's many people see them in Publix and know that they're on the zoning board, but that is part of the calculation I think went into this recommendation.
What's your recommendation?
He's not allowed to.
Yeah.
This is a policy decision.
Motion to approve, although I have some wording suggestion. I have some wording.
Then if we're going to do this, and I'm going to make an amendment too, I want a list kept by the staff of everybody on this council that talks to them about projects, and it'll be kept, the running list will be kept in Debbie Philpeck's office, because that's something that I know is not religiously adhered to.
Well, they already have to do that. They have to.
You have to do it, but it's not being done.
Wait. The obligation on communications is on the council. Right now, staff doesn't keep, unless they keep it just for their own notations. They keep records of all the emails that come in, things like that, to put into the file. But they're not keeping tabs on communications of the council.
I don't think we should force. Yeah, the responsibility should fall on us, not on staff.
That's true, but
when I've talked to staff, though, it's always been, I don't care which way you
not
go, and they just present both sides.
I'm not in favor of this item, because I think what it's going to do is set up situations where you're at a dinner, one of the events we go to, and we happen to see one of the people that has an application. We didn't plan it, they're there. We happen to sit at the same table. You know what? Somebody's going to say, oh, you didn't turn a form in. Oh, you didn't have a staff with you, so you shouldn't have been there. You're going to have create a lot of stuff. Right now, ex parte is reported whenever we meet with developers or architects and all that. Generally speaking, in my case, most of the time I have either city attorney, John Domer, somebody like that with me. And it's reported. In fact, if anything, Derek says I put too much in what was said and what wasn't said, so.
Okay. So there's been a motion to approve this one, or are we going to keep going? I'm sorry, do you want
Do
to?
it separately? There's only one left.
Yeah, sure. Why don't we finish up there?
Well, why don't we're going to do other ones before we decide this?
Well, we agreed on everything else, right?
No, I don't agree with this, you mean? On the, changing this code of ethics?
Let's vote on this.
Yeah, there's been a motion. Why don't we vote on this one? There's been a motion and a second
But I
on
just
this one.
I just want to make a suggestion on language, and Derek, if the suggestion makes sense and if it passes, we don't have to wordsmith it here, do we?
No.
All right.
If you give a motion on direction, I can make changes consistent.
All right, well, why don't we just vote on it, then I'll give my suggestion, see how it comes out.
Well, what are the suggestions?
Oh, well, the suggestion simply is that, I really don't get into weeds, but the suggestions, I don't think anybody out there knows what ex parte means.
I do.
He's talking about
The public,
he's talking about
the
ballot
public.
Oh.
All right, so the suggestion has to do with words to just make that more clear, that's all. Yeah.
Well, Mike?
Why don't we just vote?
Can we have this apply to staff also, if we're talking to staff?
It does.
It does apply to, that's what the change.
Makes you
is.
talk.
But I mean, even on any project.
So we're gonna have 2 staff members there to listen?
Well, that's what I mean. Should we have another staff member to, listen to the other staff member? Or should we have the developer there if we're talking to staff? If you want to be fair.
Well, that's gonna be my question. That's what I was getting ready to ask.
Can I make
How
a suggestion?
how
We just
much-
vote if you, I mean.
What about a room
Well, no,
with a
with
recorder?
well, this is, I'm opposed to it right now, and some of it's based on staff time. We're government light now. For every one of these meetings that we may decide to take on ourselves, we're gonna have to maybe inconvenience staff and ourselves, like, okay, I'm available this, and this time. Nobody from staff is, so now we've gotta change it again, and change it again with lining up things. With lining up different schedules. I mean, look how hard it
Staff
is.
might have to meet the same person 6, 7 times, right?
So I don't want to extend this because we have other things to do, and we've talked about this incessantly at other meetings. But I'll just make one point. There are cities in Florida that absolutely flat out do not permit ex parte under the Jennings case. And the idea when you meet somebody in Publix is simply, this requires a judicial proceeding, you need to come to the meeting. It's not really that complicated. It's not really that complicated. It's different than everything else we do on council. So to me, when I saw this, this is far less than those other cities do. This is a compromise. I want much more. I would want what the city of Miami has or other big cities have, but I'm not going to sit there arguing all day. So this is a compromise, so I'm for it. That's all I got to say about it.
Okay. There's been a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on this item only? Roll call, please.
Well,
Derek?
I'll just, maybe before, if you want to take public comments, because this is a public hearing, maybe what I would recommend is that you vote on this item, and then at the end, you have a final vote to approve the whole slate, and you can have the public comment at that point if something changes.
Okay.
Rather than having public comment at each point.
Sure.
And I just have one comment. I said I wasn't going to, but I do think that this is something that should be decided by the people. And I agree that it's kind of minimal. I just wanted to understand what we were voting in here, whether there were any unintended consequences to the language. That was my question here. And I'm going to vote in favor of it because I think the people should speak to us here. Whether or not you agree with this, you can vote no, just like any other citizen.
Okay, there's been a motion to accept and a second. Is there further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mayor Simmons,
No.
Councilman O'Flynn,
Aye.
Councilman Gibson,
No.
Councilman Forbes,
No.
Councilwoman Caramba,
Aye.
Councilman DeWitt,
No.
Councilwoman Carr.
No.
Motion fails.
And then the last
Don't make
item.
changes anyhow?
You want to make changes anyhow? Yeah.
No. Okay, and then I think I just want a clarification of, does this apply, who are city officers? Are we city officers or just the staff here?
The reason we went back and forth on actually listing out the places, the city officers would constitute myself, Arlene, Matt, Finance, anyone under the Code of Ethics, the state of Florida, that's listed as an officer. And if you want additional clarification, I could put in a reference to the statute for that purpose. But the idea is anyone who's required under Florida law to do reporting for ethics purposes, is restricted to ethics, other ethics standards, would be listed as an officer under this
So
provision.
this, I think, is kind of important under the First Amendment. Because for people who don't have this in front of them, it says they can't support or oppose any candidate or affect any election. Now, I know we had an issue in the last election where, forget about the issue. There's a policy that the city manager has put out that basically tells staff they shouldn't be mucking around in city elections, all right? Is that a fair layman's?
For each start of the season, we have a memorandum that we provide to council and to all of staff too.
All right, so that's the policy, but Derek,
And just so the public aware, the former city manager put out that policy, yet ignored his own policy.
Well, I don't-
His own advice.
I'm not trying to get into that.
I understand, but
I
just so
really am
people
not.
understand where it came from.
All right, that's what's been said. And I don't,
Well,
I don't
it was
disagree.
in pictures.
I understand.
It was proven.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but there are two sides to every story.
Absolutely.
I agree with you, but there are two sides to
He
every.
said it out and ignored it.
Well, whatever.
At least 2 sides to every story. So your point.
There's two sides to every story, even though I agree with you. All right. But my question is, what are the First Amendment, what does Florida say anyhow And what are the First Amendment implications of this?
Well, we had a lot of discussion on this particular issue, and particularly on the speech issue. And while there was never a final, a more formalized draft that was more expansive than this,
Right.
initially we talked about speech and all of those issues. Where we ended up with this language is basically already in line with both the elections code, the state elections code, and the code on ethics.
Oh, so this is the Florida law?
Yeah, it's already.
What are we doing here? What are we bothering?
Well, if it's a charter provision, just like violation of Chapter 112 of the Code of Ethics, someone could be removed from office for violating it. This would make it a charter issue, which means they could also, forfeit their position with either on staff or on the council through violation of this.
Well, was my question. If this applies to council, does that mean we can't support candidates that are running for office?
No, this is, you are prohibiting, the second part of this in the actual language, section 62. Neither shall the mayor or a member of the city council use any promise or threat or reward or threat of loss to encourage or coerce any officer or employee. So you can't threaten me, Arlene, or staff to support or contribute to the political issue candidate. So you can't use your position to threaten staff to help, to donate, to help support somebody else, to say, oh, I see that sign that code enforcement's about to take down, but I like that candidate,
Matt, you're off the hook with Bishop. You're off the hook with Bishop for football. You're off the hook.
Stop talking about that. This provision is reciprocal. It's basically saying that staff is not going to get involved, and particularly the officers are not going to get involved in using their position to influence elections, and neither is the council going to use its position to influence staff.
But this is Florida law.
This is already Florida law.
Motion to approve if it hasn't already happened.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All right, so we'll vote on this last item, and then we'll take some public input. Does that sound right? Does that sound right? Okay. Okay, there's been a motion to approve in a second. Is there further discussion on this item? Roll call, please.
Councilman O'Flynn.
Aye.
Councilman Gibson.
Aye.
Councilman Forbes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Carumba.
Aye.
Councilman DeWitt.
Aye.
Councilwoman Carr.
Aye.
Mayor Simmons.
Aye. Okay, now we're going to take public, Derek, anything else? Okay.
The very last item is the state revenue sharing. I don't think you guys had any comments on that. So I would say take your public comments now, then move the slate of those that haven't been pulled out.
Okay. Members of the public that would like to speak or have any input here? Okay, seeing none. We will, what? Motion to approve the ones? Yeah.
The whole thing, subject to the one that was taken out?
Okay. Second? Okay, there's been a motion and a second to approve the slate that has not been removed? Am I saying that the right way?
And with
Okay.
and with the, not the alternate, but the other language that Mike pointed out. All right.
On question 5, yes.
Right.
Okay. Roll call, please.
And the 24-hour.
And the 24 hours.
I mean, all the changes you guys discussed already, there's actually like 4. I'm going to make all those changes in the final draft.
Okay.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Councilman Gibson.
Aye.
Councilman Forbes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Carumba.
Aye.
Councilman DeWitt.
Aye.
Councilwoman Carr.
Aye.
Mayor Simmons.
Aye.
Councilman O'Flynn.
Aye.
Okay. Derek, what's next?
Well, in a few minutes, we're going to start on our executive session WCI. I don't know if you want to take a break before that, because we'll probably want to go straight from here into there, or if you want to think you could sneak another ordinance in, but I know you have some public comment waiting for it.
Well,
My recommendation would be to take a break, come back in 5 till, go ahead and open up the public hearing for the executive session, and then we'll come back.
but that's going to keep people here an hour or so, or two.
But we have, I think, Councilman DeWitt, you're heading out
Yes, at noon.
At noon.
at noon.
What if we were to take this item up and
If you want to,
start our executive session at 11:15 or 11:20, whenever it ends, so we don't keep everybody here for an hour?
if you want to start this item and then take the public comment first, the second reading, take the public comment first, and then we can,
Okay?
Do we
Go
have
that
to
way.
stop at 11?
and stop it. Well, we have to stop sometime near 11, because I think the executive session probably will run an hour.
All right.
I mean, I can leave 5, 10, 15 minutes either way. I mean,
Okay.
So we'll start with
Yeah, why don't we start, Derek, and then take public comment right up front?
an ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs providing for an addition to the Bonita Springs Land Development Code, Chapter 3, Development Standards, creating a new section under Article 5, Division 2, the Bonita Beach Road Design Standards, Chapter 4, Zoning, Article 5, Division 11, creating a new subdivision, establishing the Bonita Beach Road Corridor Overlay, amending Chapter 4, Zoning, Article 5, Divisions 5, 6, 7, and 8, Use Tables, amending Chapter 4, Zoning, Article 3, Division 1, Plan Developments, providing for conflicts of law, severability, codification, scriveners, and an effective date.
Okay.
And so now, if it'd just be easier, rather than having staff give their presentation, maybe it'd be easier to take the public comment, and I also take the public comment that was given at the very beginning of the meeting, and I have that incorporated in, so it's all part of the same record.
Okay.
Can I ask on a public comment front, a question of Ms. Konzakowski? The points you were making this morning. Well, can I ask a question about your comment, because I didn't understand it? Were those comments making a point that's not in here and need to be included, or not?
I think it should be noted in the zoning.
All right.
Because if an application comes into
I'm sorry to do this, Dawn, but, because I don't know if you're going to leave after the hour, so I just wanted to get that.
No, I'm gonna wait. I
Oh,
want
you're
to
going to
see
wait,
the
fine. All right, don't
presentation.
forget it. All right.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
that's fine, I'm good.
Before I start.
And how long is the presentation?
3 hours.
What I'm getting at is if we can move back our executive session to 11:15 or 11:30, I don't know. I'm just trying to,
Are we allowed to do that?
Yeah, you can move it back a little bit.
Okay.
Good morning. For the record, Jacqueline Genson. Really, the presentation was just to highlight the table I put in the green sheet package, just to elaborate on that, and then some changes that we made since first reading, and then we'd be happy to answer the public's questions that they've raised.
Okay.
So we envision it to be very short.
Can you go through that, Jackie?
Yes, I'd be
Or
happy
John? Or whomever? Thank you.
And Sean's actually going to go ahead and pass out the specific changes in page numbers that we've made since first reading. But essentially, in the table, what we wanted to do and what we heard from you was go over those areas that there were some concerns.
Thank you.
Do I have the clicker? Okay. Okay, so what we heard for Chapter 3, what we did is we added language under and created an intent section. And really what we did is we took text from the transportation element that went ahead and reiterated the network zones and what the purpose and intent of creating those zones were. And there is actually a policy in the comprehensive plan that did state that we would go ahead and provide implementing land development code regulations. So in the text of the Land Development Code, you'll see that we actually added language about working with what I'll call our community partners. So it's Collier County, Lee County, the Florida Department of Transportation, and the private development community, and hoping to achieve those design sections for each network zone. So it's really soft language, so because we know that Bonita Beach Road is not entirely a city facility, it is a county facility, and then there's other sections for the Department of Transportation near the interstate. Also, we want to reiterate that this does not require acquisition of additional right-of-way and no reduction or increase in lanes. For Chapter 4, what we wanted to state is what the regulations do. They do provide guidelines for creating more of an urban form of development along Bonita Beach Road. It does not change any underlying future land use map designation of the properties. That's not what the Bonita Beach Road Vision comprehensive plan amendments were envisioned to do. They wanted to create these mixture of uses in these nodes and things like that, which most of the categories on the existing comprehensive plan, such as your general commercial category, your industrial category, do allow for non-residential and residential densities. This does apply for planned developments based on a percentage of build out. That's also in the policy language. This does not lower the standard for the duration of rights of master concept plans. That's already in your code. If anything, it's an additional layer of protection. What this also does is it eliminates the planned development requirement in the code for certain uses of over an acre versus under an acre. But for some uses in the proposed use table, either we eliminated them entirely or we recommended that they only be reviewed by special exception, which still requires a public hearing before this board. It allows you the ability to condition uses, and it also allows for public comment before an application is filed and before it's found sufficient. So there's still public involvement. It does establish development regulations for urban form in each development standard section for Bonita Beach Road. It does not modify the height. We heard that well and loud. So we went ahead and kept the regulation in there for 35 feet. There is supplemental regulations in the existing land development code that set forth regulations for the Bonita Beach Road corridor. So Little Hickory Island has a section. Bonita Beach Road from US 41 west to Little Hickory Island has a section. And then also there's standards for Bonita Beach Road for US 41 east. So those sections remain unchanged. What it does also do is we provided standards for drive-throughs, any uses with a drive-through, and also we added some language for auto-oriented uses, so such as gas stations. We would like to see the buildings in the front and the gas pumps in the back. We do provide maximum parking requirements. We encourage shared parking facilities. Again, we didn't want to see a lot of asphalt parking lots. We also want to see a lot of sharing of other infrastructure such as solid waste and recycling. We do provide buffering between non-residential and residential uses, even though this is promoting a more urban form, so that is also built into the code. And then we also provide illustrations to go ahead and help provide developers guidelines of how we envision the development to occur. There is a page that Mr. Gibbons handed out for you. These are highlighting those changes since the first reading, the exact page numbers. So again, page 4, we added the purpose and intent for the transportation sections. Page 10, we modified the applicability section for minor projects. Page 13, we added uses relative to the comprehensive plan. We heard that was very important, so we added that item on there. That's also something that's also in our conventional districts, our conventional zoning districts, so that's keeping in sync with that. We did go ahead and sit down with our zoning staff again to look at the use tables to make sure we were comfortable with the changes we proposed. So you'll see some changes to those pages. We went ahead and modified and add notes to the development standards table. You do have some sections along Bonita Beach Road where single-family residential is allowed by right, by the comprehensive plan, and also in the existing underlying zoning. But we also know that design aesthetics are important. So we added a note stating that single-family duplex and two-family attached has to meet an architectural standard if visible from Bonita Beach Road. We also added some other notes about a maximum street setback in the interstate zone if parking is going to be in the front. And then, again, as I stated, we added some additional language for auto-oriented uses. With that, I am cognizant of questions brought up by the public, so I can either kind of try to address them now, or we can wait till the conclusion of public comment.
Okay, council, at this point, you have questions? Yes, Peter.
One question.
Yeah.
So there's no increase in density or intensity in this?
Not as far as the comprehensive plan is concerned. I do understand how the public could be concerned where, okay, now we're allowing single-family, multifamily, and townhouse development in certain zones, but some of the conventional districts already allow those uses. So if it's a question of development standards, if we need to add additional development standards to the table, that's fine. I will also note that at development order review, we are required to also look at the comprehensive plan. It's in chapter 3-157. That is a requirement that all development orders are evaluated for the comprehensive plan as well.
Jackie, to clarify, the comprehensive plan dictates the intensities and densities, correct? So it's not in excess of those that's existing comprehensive plan.
There is no increase of the maximum allowable dwelling units. But each zoning district has its own property development standards for how you subdivide land and things like that. So that might be where the public might have some concerns, but I think we have a tool to evaluate that.
I don't really understand it. It's kind of like I asking a direct question, is it yes or no, and there's something about homes. Does this allow for increased density or intensity, is the question.
So you do have one property, and again, if you're talking about the beach zone, You have one property that is CF3 parcel. It's the beach park by Lee County. By this amendment, you know, in that whole beach zone, single family is permissible, townhomes, two-family attached. So in terms of zoning, there wasn't single family or residential allowed in a CF3 district. But under the beach zone, we do allow we do allow residential uses.
So you're allowing additional uses where commercial uses were only permitted and you weren't allowed to have residential uses?
At a
Vice
zoning
versa?
level.
So you're not increasing the overall number of units that they can receive?
Correct.
For the comprehensive plan, so it's more of a mixed-use development, is that what you're? So are you discussing parcels that originally only permitted commercial? They're now permitted to have some form of residential?
But again, so when a development comes in, we will look at not only this zoning table, but we have to look at the comprehensive plan. And so in that, let me pull up my map real quick. Actually, that property is recreation on the future land use map, so no density would be allowed there. So in that situation, under the beach park, even though it's CF3 for zoning, the beach zone would allow residential uses to be there, but the comprehensive plan doesn't allow residential to be there. So again, you gotta look at both together.
And which is the preceding document?
Comprehensive plan. So we are not changing comprehensive plan land use map, we're not changing density and intensity at all. But the concern of coastal, where it's done at the
I guess
zone
I'd like to know from staff, if you can't do it today, it's fine, what's the implicit increase in density, implicit in the fact that the uses are changing and those uses apparently are more dense or intense than what was previously allowed? That's what you seem to be saying. So, you know, if it's minimal, fine, but if it's not, so I'd just like to, I guess I'd vote no until I understand that.
But it's not more intense than what the comprehensive
I understand
plan
that.
allows.
I understand that.
Fred, you had a question.
Yeah, well, my question is, what happens to projects that are already in the pipeline when we adopt this? Like, I know the people that have control of that property, 70-some acres at the corner of Bonita Grande and Bonita Beach Road, they've actually submitted something in the...
Sure.
Are they included in this? Is Horizon Park? Any other projects that are not built out? Any of those?
I can answer the Horizon Park question. There are, based on some comments from parties who have participated in the process ever since we started with the Bonita Beach Road vision, I'm proposing 3 changes, and what I'm gonna do is I sent them to Debbie. They're gonna be in the whereases. I would have got to this at the end, but I'll address it now. Everyone who came in during the moratorium, who agreed to come into voluntarily into compliance with the Bonita Beach Road vision, they would be, if they had approval during that period, that would be deemed in compliance with this agreement. The settlement agreement we had with Angler's Paradise, they were the ones who challenged the original comp plan, but we came to a settlement agreement where they would come in with a modified process. That really doesn't look like they're gonna be majorly affected, but they would be, to the extent that we agreed to something in the settlement agreement, whatever that proposal would be, exempt where it's modified by this. And Horizon Park is another one, because Horizon Park was actually in the original moratorium at the Bonita Beach Road vision. They were deemed to be in compliance at the extent that they had come into focus at that point. And then in June, you heard again from them seeking an amendment to make sure they were still in compliance. So to the extent those 2 prior approvals by the council modify this, they would be vested to those approvals. So those 3 things are things that are brought up that we want to incorporate in. Anyone else who's in process, Jackie can deal with them.
Yeah, so what will happen is they're already placed on notice that these amendments are going through. If this is adopted, their plan development will be evaluated under these standards. And if they need a deviation, they'll request it. The question comes up with them is that they have a variety of uses that they're asking for on the commercial out parcels, because the entire property actually is not in this corridor. It's only the front portion. So there's some uses where they might have some concern because the commercial might come online later. And also, the applicant's not technically a commercial builder, they're more so of a residential builder. So there is a question of timing. So possibly we can work with them on some conditions, or if we can have enough comfort that those uses have proper development standards, maybe they won't have to go through those special exception review processes.
So if I understand you right, on Horizon Park, the only one that would not be grandfathered in is what that one parcel they haven't got a client for.
Well, anything that we haven't seen already and that the council's reviewed or approved would be maybe modified by this, but to the extent they just had an administrative, so the issues about how many lanes of parking they would have in front of the building, the orientation, all those issues that you've already seen, those are locked in.
Now, where are we at on the other one I asked about, the Bonita?
That's what I just talked about, and Home Montez is here representing their client on that. We're going to work through that. I think the devil's obviously in the details, and we'll have to work on staff's comfort and ultimately your comfort on allowing some of those uses that here proposes special exceptions, but they would like them as permissible uses.
Now, do we have a clear provision that parking garages can be built along Bonita Beach Road?
So in that table, we actually, for the parking garages, and thank you for bringing that up, we actually specified, and it's very similar to the existing code, parking garage is public and parking garage private. So there's regulations in there, and what we have for that, I'm sorry, I gotta find it exactly for you. It is on page 20 of the ordinance. So the private is allowed by right, and what private means is it's the parking garage that's ancillary to a permitted use or a building that's already there. If someone wanted to erect a public parking garage for the purpose of anyone can park there, that is a special exception. But again, we do have some active plan development applications where if a public parking garage is requested, you have the ability to allow that by right at this time.
Are they allowed as many floors as they can fit in with the height restrictions, or are they constrained by floors?
So we did not, height is as it stands in the land development code today. So it is
height,
it's a number. So 35 feet, and then there's the ability to increase height based on increasing your setbacks.
Cool. Okay.
Could you just comment on the point that was raised that the line for the beach was inappropriate for the designations for the street? You know, there wasn't enough room. Is that an issue?
I don't know if the public was concerned about the travel lane width, and if that's the case, then J Suite's more appropriate to talk about that. But the network zone for the beach zone is actually based on the comprehensive plan transportation network map that was adopted as part of the tool visioning amendments. So staff did not change that map.
So whatever is existing is just going to be maintained?
You guys want to hear from the public before we go into executive session, so
All right.
maybe some of the more specifics could be addressed afterwards, but I think they got.
That'd be great. Thank you, Jackie. Okay, members of the public that would like to speak at this time, please come forward. Welcome back.
Good morning again, and thank you for taking my comments now before your executive session. I appreciate that. So again, for the record, my name is Paula McMichael. I'm the Director of Planning for Home Montez. I'm here representing Lynx Zuckerman at Bonita Grand LLC. They've submitted a mixed-use plan development application. It's for property located at the northwest corner of Bonita Beach Road and Bonita Grand, so east of 75. As Jackie already said, the southern portion of the site along Bonita Beach Road is within your interstate zone portion of the overlay. We had an initial pre-app with staff in February. We had several additional meetings, including with your consultant for the corridor, DPZ, and we submitted on July 26th. So we understand that the most important elements of your vision for Bonita Beach Road are the interconnectivity, improving the street network, and the overall design or built form to be implemented through urban design regulations. Understanding the importance of that design element, my client actually hired a site planner who used to work for DPZ so that we would know that what we were proposing would be consistent with your vision. However, the final version of your LDC amendments also includes that schedule of uses and lists certain uses as requiring a special exception. As you're aware, the special exception process requires all the same public hearings that we're going to be going through for the plan development rezoning. So it's unclear how that applies. Those special exception uses applies, excuse me, when you're already going through a plan development rezoning process. My client was aware that there were going to be design regulations when they decided to move forward with this rezoning, but they were not aware that there were going to be use restrictions. So my first request would be that the application is grandfathered in under the current regulations and reviewed under those current regulations. As I said, we'll be providing interconnection to the properties to the west. We'll be consistent with the design guidelines proposed by DPZ, but we have concerns with the schedule of uses and how that fits in with the plan development rezoning process. If the petition cannot be grandfathered in, we are requesting an explanation of how those uses listed as special exceptions will be handled for properties that are requesting an amendment to an existing plan development. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other members of the public that would like to speak? Good morning.
Good morning. Neil Montgomery for the record, representing the Project Horizon Park. If you look at your code, the proposed amendments, you have a section 4-897, applicability. And if you look at paren G, it tells you that if you're more than 50% built out, then these don't necessarily apply to you. I'm here to tell you that in Florida law, I think, and across the country, there's a thing called equitable estoppel. And what it says is, if the government gives me approval and I move forward in reliance and I spend money in reliance on that approval, it's not right for you to then turn around and take that approval away from me. And I would wager to say, if I've built out 50% of my project, that means I probably put in 100% of my infrastructure. So I would caution you to think a little bit more about those levels that you have there, because you're taking away uses and you're taking away rights from people with existing plan development. And I'm particularly worried about Horizon because, as you kind of already discussed, if in Ordinance 1712, that was your temporary moratorium ordinance, there were projects, including Horizon, but included Bonita Exchange, Burnwood, Park of Commerce, and Horizon were mentioned as not being subject to the temporary moratorium. And then for Horizon, we went through the zoning process, and we have Ordinance 1707 that says these are our rules and we're not subject to it. And then when the medical office building that you recall, the 45,000 square foot building, the staff wanted to make double extra sure we weren't subject to the overlay, and you approved administrative action 19-61622. This particular project has been asked and answered this question by this council 3 times and has spent money in reliance on the approval such that I would submit it's unjust to now change the rules for the project and make them have to go all the way back through the zoning process again, which is what would happen if you apply the ordinance. So I'm hoping that the exception or exemption that Mr. Rooney has discussed with you, that you will include that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Other members of the public? Hello, Don.
Hi, Dawn Konzakowski for the record. Amy, you asked staff about my concern with the highway layout. What I mentioned was that the beach zone probably should start on the east side of the bridge rather than the west side of the bridge, at where Bonita Beach Road connects with Hickory Island, because if you have a 100-foot wide road that starts where Bonita Beach Road hits Hickory Boulevard and just goes to the bridge, then it has to narrow down because the bridge isn't 100 feet wide. So that was my just being practical. If it started on the west side of the bridge, then you wouldn't run into that problem. And my other concern was, and I'm glad staff's added that they're going to review the comp plan for each application because it's required by state law. And I just want to reiterate that Goal 5, Policy 511, 513, and 514 need to be taken into consideration for every application they review, whether it comes for special exception or whether they make an administrative decision on it. Those need to be taken into consideration because it's specific to Bonita Beach Road and the evacuation zone. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Don. Other members of the public that would like to speak? Welcome.
Thank you. Mike Liggins with Horizon Park. We own property at the southeast corner of I-75 and Bonita Beach Road. Currently, as you know, we've gone through the ordinance, the rezone. Ms. Montgomery has provided an outline of where we are currently. Physically out there on the property, we are working on the infrastructure, working on digging out the lake, working on putting the roads in. So we are invested in the property, and we're looking to provide a nice property at the time of once our users come in. As I see it, we currently have 0% of our planned development constructed, and we are in progress of developing the infrastructure. So this would apply to us, and it has the potential to wipe out our CPD, and that's what we're concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Other members of the public that would like to speak? Okay. Seeing none? Derek?
Well, at this point, what I would recommend is that we adjourn the public hearing and hold it over until after the WCI executive session.
Okay.
So we'll be adjourning our regular meeting, and I would ask that we take a 5-minute recess so we can set up the court reporter and everything for the opening of the executive session.
Okay.
You might want to tell the public how long this is going to take.
The executive session will last approximately 1 hour, so enjoy your lunch.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute break, so let's come on back at 11:18, I guess it is.